There are moments in sports media that cut through all the noise, all the hot takes, all the manufactured controversy, all the debate show theater, and land somewhere real. Yesterday was one of those moments. Stephen A. Smith sat down on First Take, looked directly into the camera, took off his glasses, and did something he almost never does. He called for someone's job. Not a coach who lost a playoff series, not a player who blew a fourth-quarter lead, the commissioner of the WNBA. And when you find out exactly what just happened behind closed doors at league headquarters, you won't just understand why he said it, you'll be asking why it took this long. Because what we're talking about isn't another controversy about TV ratings. It's not another debate about Olympic roster selections. What we're dealing with right now is something far more serious, far more calculated, and far more self-destructive than anything this league has done before. The WNBA just went to war with the only person keeping their entire operation alive. And they did it in writing, with a formal warning, over something so mind-bendingly irrational that when you hear it, you'll need a second to process whether it's actually real. Let's get into it. Multiple sources with direct knowledge of internal WNBA communications have confirmed that Commissioner Cathy Engelbert's office issued a formal warning to Caitlin Clark. A warning to the woman who revolutionized women's basketball in this country. The reason they gave? It wasn't a failed drug test, it wasn't a conduct violation, there was no fight, no legal trouble, no scandal. Caitlin Clark signed a landmark broadcasting deal with NBC Universal, a deal that makes her one of the most visible female athletes in the history of sports media, and the WNBA called it a conflict of interest. Read that back slowly. The woman who turned half-empty arenas into sold-out events. The woman who dragged the WNBA into ABC primetime slots and billion-dollar media rights negotiations. The woman who put charter flights in the pockets of every veteran player on every roster. She went out and signed a deal to appear on national television talking about basketball, the sport she plays, the sport the WNBA broadcasts on the same network. And the commissioner's response was to open her legal team's laptop and start typing a warning. Let that breathe for a moment, because the full absurdity of this decision doesn't land all at once. It hits you in waves. To understand why this NBC deal set off alarms in the league office, you have to understand what it actually is, because the conflict of interest framing they're pushing doesn't survive 5 seconds of scrutiny. Caitlin Clark signed a contract to serve as a broadcaster and on-air analyst for NBC Sports. She'll appear in studio segments, she'll provide commentary, she'll conduct sideline interviews, she'll be part of the network's basketball coverage architecture during the offseason and potentially during major sporting events. She's not competing in another basketball league. She's not endorsing a rival organization. She's sitting in front of a camera and talking about the sport she's dedicated her life to on NBC, the same NBC that broadcasts WNBA games, the same NBC that just signed a historic agreement to carry women's basketball into millions of American homes. If Caitlin Clark sits down at an NBC anchor desk and talks about basketball for 2 hours on a Sunday afternoon, casual sports fans see her face, they hear her voice, they develop a connection to her. And when the WNBA season tips off, those same fans are significantly more likely to tune in, buy tickets, stream games, and purchase jerseys. That's not a conflict of interest. That is textbook marketing. That is the kind of organic brand amplification that advertising agencies charge millions of dollars to manufacture. The WNBA is getting it for free because one of their players is compelling enough to earn a national broadcasting platform. And their response is to send her a legal warning. Stephen A. Smith addressed the absurdity of this argument directly and without hesitation. He made the comparison that needed to be made. Promoting the NBA helps the WNBA. Basketball is basketball. He's right. NBC Universal holds broadcasting rights for both leagues. The NBA and the WNBA exist within the same organizational ecosystem. When Caitlin Clark is visible on NBC programming, it doesn't divert attention away from the WNBA. It builds awareness for the product. It creates casual viewers who become interested fans. It does the one thing the league has struggled to do for 3 decades. It makes women's basketball culturally relevant to people who don't already follow it obsessively. Think about Michael Jordan filming Space Jam in 1996. Was anyone at the Chicago Bulls organization sending him cease and desist letters? Did the front office call an emergency meeting about him starring in a Warner Brothers film created a conflict with their basketball operation? Of course not. They understood that Jordan's crossover cultural presence was a net positive for the franchise and for the NBA as a whole. Think about LeBron James appearing on TNT broadcasts, doing interviews, being a presence in sports media during the offseason. Did the Lakers ownership ever suggest him having a visible media footprint created a conflict of interest? The question is almost laughable, because every serious sports organization understands that their biggest star being a prominent public figure is an asset, not a liability. Every serious organization except, apparently, the WNBA.
The conflict of interest argument isn't just weak, it's a fiction, it's a pretense. It's the legal language they're using to dress up a decision that has nothing to do with league integrity and everything to do with something far uglier. But we'll get to the real reason in a moment. First, let's talk about money, because the financial dimension of this story makes the league's position even more indefensible. Do you know what the WNBA pays Caitlin Clark as a base salary? $76,000. Not per game, not per month, per year. $76,000 annually to the player who has generated more revenue, more media value, and more cultural relevance for this league than anyone in its history. For context that should make every sports fan's jaw hit the floor, NBA mascots, the people in full-body foam costumes who shoot t-shirts out of cannons during timeouts, earn an average of around $600,000 per year. The person in the furry suit dancing on the sideline at halftime makes roughly 8 times what the WNBA pays its most valuable player. Not just its most valuable player, arguably its only globally recognizable brand asset. And yet, the league office, while paying her a salary that barely clears the threshold of what many consider a living wage in major American cities, believes it has the moral authority and the legal standing to tell Caitlin Clark that she cannot sign an 8-figure broadcasting deal with one of the largest media companies in the world. The audacity required to arrive at that position is genuinely staggering. It's not just hypocritical, it's insulting in a way that goes beyond sports or business. It's the kind of institutional arrogance that you'd struggle to find parallels for outside of the most dysfunctional organizations in history. Put yourself in this scenario for a second. You're working a job that pays you the absolute minimum your employer can legally get away with. You've performed at an extraordinary level. You've brought in clients and revenue that the company had never seen before your arrival. You've transformed the organization's reputation and market position. And then, one day, you land a second opportunity, a huge one, a life-changing contract from a major corporation that wants to hire you for work completely separate from your primary job, work that doesn't compete with your employer, work that actually increases your visibility and indirectly promotes the place you work. And your minimum wage employer sends you a letter telling you they have a problem with it. What do? You laugh. You fold the letter in half, put it in your back pocket, and you walk out the door. That is exactly the position the WNBA has created for themselves. If Commissioner Engelbert wants to enforce exclusivity on Caitlin Clark's outside business ventures, if she wants to plant a flag and say that the league has a legitimate claim to her commercial activities beyond basketball, then she needs to write a check that reflects that level of control. Put $50 million guaranteed on the table. Build a contract that actually represents what Caitlin Clark is worth to the WNBA as a commercial entity. Negotiate in good faith with a player who has delivered value that the league's entire history couldn't match. Then, maybe you have some moral standing to have a conversation about outside employment. But for $76,000 a year, you sit down, you say thank you, and you get out of her way. The NBC deal doesn't just pay Caitlin more than the WNBA does, it pays her more in a single broadcast weekend than the league will pay her over the course of multiple seasons. Multiple years of professional basketball, traveling, grinding, absorbing every piece of physical punishment the sport demands, versus walking into an NBC studio, putting on a blazer, and talking about the game she knows better than almost anyone alive. And the WNBA wants to threaten her over the second option, while paying her wages that a first-year teacher in a rural school district would consider inadequate? This isn't a conflict of interest. This is a league that still doesn't understand its own business, and the warning they issued is proof. When Stephen A. Smith breaks from his usual role of provocateur and delivers a verdict with genuine conviction, people in sports pay attention. Not because everyone agrees with him, not because he's always right, but because when something cuts through the noise loudly enough to move him from debate to declaration, it's usually because the situation has crossed a line that serious sports observers can't ignore in good conscience. Yesterday, on First Take, he crossed that line. He took off his glasses, he looked into the camera, and he said what needed to be said. He called the WNBA's warning to Caitlin Clark blasphemous. He said it reeks of jealousy. He said Commissioner Engelbert should be sending Caitlin flowers and gratitude, not cease and desist letters. And then he went further. He didn't just criticize the decision, he called for the commissioner's resignation, publicly, on one of the most watched sports programs in the country. That is not a small moment. That is not a hot take designed to generate clicks before the commercial break. That is one of the most prominent figures in sports media drawing a clear line and saying this leadership has failed beyond redemption.
What makes Smith's reaction significant isn't just his platform, it's the fact that he's not alone. The sports media landscape, which rarely finds consensus on anything, has looked at this situation and arrived at the same conclusion. This is indefensible. Commentators who disagree with each other on virtually every other topic have found common ground here. Analysts who would normally defend institutional authority in professional sports have looked at this warning and shaken their heads. The near universal condemnation from people who cover sports for a living tells you something important. This isn't complicated. This isn't a nuanced situation where reasonable people can see merit on both sides. This is an organization making a transparently bad decision for obviously bad reasons, and the sports world is saying so out loud. Smith touched on something that deserves more examination, though. He didn't just criticize the commissioner. He pointed the lens at the veteran players. He said they need to look in the mirror. He said that instead of being resentful of Caitlin's NBC deal, they should be asking how they can position themselves to land deals of their own. Instead of trying to pull her back to their level, they should be recognizing that she raised the floor for everyone. That's the part of this story that the formal warning is obscuring, and it's the part that explains everything about why this situation exists at all. Let's stop dancing around it. The formal warning issued by the commissioner's office didn't originate in a boardroom strategy session. It didn't come from a group of executives sitting around a conference table reviewing broadcasting agreements and identifying genuine organizational conflicts. It came from the locker room. And more specifically, it came from veteran players who have been whispering in Cathy Engelbert's ear for months, applying pressure that she ultimately wasn't strong enough to resist. This jealousy isn't new. It's been building since the moment Caitlin Clark signed her rookie contract. You've seen it in the subtle shade thrown during post-game interviews. You've seen it in the body language during all-star events. You've seen it in the way certain veteran players have responded publicly when asked about her. There's a simmering resentment that runs through a segment of WNBA locker rooms, and to understand it, you have to understand the history these players are carrying. These veteran players spent years, in some cases a decade or more, grinding in almost total obscurity, flying commercial to road games, sharing hotel rooms to cut costs, playing overseas during the WNBA offseason, sometimes in places like Russia, thousands of miles from home, just to earn enough money to make ends meet. They fought for every inch of recognition the league received. They advocated for better conditions, better pay, better treatment when the sport wasn't generating enough revenue to justify it. They carried the WNBA through years when arenas were half full and TV ratings were an afterthought. They invested their entire professional lives into a league that paid them modestly and asked them to be grateful for the opportunity. And then Caitlin Clark arrived. In 12 months, everything changed. Charter flights became standard. Prime-time slots appeared on network television. Endorsement deals that veteran players couldn't have dreamed of began materializing. Merchandise flew off shelves. Arena attendance records shattered. The league negotiated a media rights deal worth exponentially more than any previous agreement in WNBA history. The conditions these veteran players had fought for, loudly, publicly, desperately, suddenly existed. Not because their decade of advocacy finally broke through, because a 22-year-old rookie put on a jersey and the business case became undeniable overnight. The resentment that produces isn't rational, it's not logical, it's also not surprising. When you've given everything to something for years and someone arrives and accomplishes more in months than you did in a decade, it stings in ways that are difficult to process professionally or emotionally. Especially when that person's success is amplified, not just by talent, but by circumstances, by the fact that she's white in a predominantly black league, by the fact that she came from a massively televised college program, by the media dynamics of American sports that these veteran players have rightfully criticized for years. The resentment is tangled up with legitimate grievances, which makes it more complicated and more difficult to address honestly. But none of that complexity changes the reality of what these veteran players have been doing. They've been lobbying the commissioner to humble Caitlin Clark. They've been pressuring league leadership to remind her that she's a rookie who hasn't earned the kind of treatment her profile is generating. They want the league to level the playing field, not by lifting everyone up, which would require more revenue and better business decisions, but by pulling the most valuable player in women's basketball down to a level that feels more equitable to people who feel they were never given what they were worth. And instead of being a leader, instead of recognizing that her job is to build the business, not manage the emotional temperature of veterans who are struggling with envy, Cathy Engelbert gave them what they wanted. She picked up her pen, she signed the warning letter, and she handed the most self-destructive document in WNBA history to a player who could walk out the door tomorrow and never need the league again.
Stephen A. Smith said it plainly. These veterans need to look in the mirror. Not to feel shame, but to ask a different question. Caitlin Clark's NBC deal didn't come from nowhere. It came from years of work, from a college career that generated unprecedented television audiences, from a personality and a skill set that made people care about women's basketball who had never thought twice about it before. Instead of asking why she got the deal, the veterans should be asking what they can do to position themselves for similar opportunities. Instead of lobbying the commissioner to constrain her, they should be thanking her for raising the commercial value of every player in the league. Because the salary cap increases, the charter flights, the media coverage, the sponsorship dollars, none of that exists without Caitlin Clark being exactly what she is. And trying to diminish her doesn't protect what the veterans built. It dismantles the foundation that makes any of it possible going forward. Now let's talk about the legal dimension of this warning, because this is where the WNBA's position doesn't just look bad, it collapses entirely. And the collapse happens fast. NBC Universal is owned by Comcast. Comcast is one of the largest and most powerful media conglomerates on the planet. Their legal department doesn't operate on a WNBA budget. Their legal department operates on a budget that makes the WNBA's entire salary cap look like a rounding error. The team of attorneys Comcast employs to protect their broadcasting agreements and talent contracts represents resources so overwhelming that the WNBA engaging them in litigation would be the institutional equivalent of a little league team challenging a major league franchise. It's not a fair fight. It's not even close to a fair fight. The outcome is decided before anyone walks into a courtroom. But let's engage the legal argument on its own terms for a moment anyway, because the conflict of interest claim the league is making doesn't hold up even before you factor in the power disparity. Caitlin Clark's standard WNBA player contract, like virtually every professional sports contract that doesn't involve a franchise player exclusivity clause written very specifically, almost certainly does not prohibit outside employment. especially outside employment in a field as distinct from competitive basketball as television broadcasting. She's not playing for another basketball team. She's not joining a rival league. She's not appearing in marketing campaigns for organizations that compete with WNBA sponsors. She's walking into an NBC studio and providing sports commentary, media work, analysis, the kind of thing that countless professional athletes in every sport do during their off-season or simultaneously with their playing careers without anyone suggesting it creates an ethical problem. And here's the specific absurdity of the conflict of interest claim. NBC airs WNBA games. NBC has a broadcasting partnership with the league. NBC's investment in women's basketball is part of what funds the league's operations and makes its expansion possible. If Caitlin Clark being associated with NBC creates a conflict of interest for the WNBA, then the WNBA's entire broadcasting arrangement is a conflict of interest. The logic doesn't work. It's circular. It's tissue paper stretched over a framework that has no real structure. Any lawyer worth their retainer fee would dismantle this argument in an afternoon. What the league is actually testing here isn't a legal theory, it's a power dynamic. They're issuing a warning to see if she'll comply, to see if the threat of institutional consequences is enough to make her step back and defer to the organization's authority. They're betting that she won't want the confrontation. They're betting that she'll prioritize keeping peace with the league over pursuing the business opportunities that her talent and platform have made available. It's an intimidation play, and it's a particularly bad one because the person they're trying to intimidate has options they clearly haven't fully reckoned with. Here's something the WNBA's legal team should have put at the top of their threat assessment before any warning was drafted. The sponsors are watching, not passively, not with polite interest, with the intense, calculating attention of corporations that have written very large checks based on a specific value proposition, and who will act decisively the moment that value proposition is threatened. State Farm, Gatorade, Nike, Wilson, these aren't small regional partners running banner ads at halftime. These are global brands that have invested millions of dollars in Caitlin Clark specifically because her visibility, her likability, her crossover cultural appeal makes their marketing dollars go further. They didn't sign deals with the WNBA and get Caitlin as a bonus. They signed deals because Caitlin exists in the WNBA's ecosystem and her star power is the engine driving the value they're purchasing. The distinction matters enormously when you're thinking about what happens if the league decides to take action against her. These sponsors are not loyal to the WNBA as an institution. They're loyal to return on investment. They're loyal to the relationship between their brand and the audiences they're trying to reach. And the audience they're reaching through their Caitlin Clark partnerships isn't the core WNBA fan base that's followed the league for years. It's the massive casual sports audience that Caitlin brought in. The people who'd never watched a WNBA game, but tuned in because they made them care. If the WNBA takes action against Caitlin that damages her relationship with fans, that undermines her public profile, that turns her story from one of success and breakthrough into one of institutional conflict and suppression, those sponsors will pick up the phone.
And the call won't be a polite one. It'll be an ultimatum. Fix this immediately or we redirect our dollars. And the WNBA, which has spent the last year finally building a commercial foundation that makes its long-term survival realistic for the first time in its history, would be faced with the prospect of those foundational sponsorship agreements walking out the door. Stephen A. Smith captured the danger precisely. You're playing with fire and you're covered in gasoline. The people who hold the financial power in this situation aren't the league office. They're not the commissioner. They're the corporations that fund the ecosystem, and they're aligned with Caitlin, not with the bureaucracy trying to constrain her. This is the part of the equation that should terrify anyone in WNBA leadership who's thinking clearly. The league has spent a decade being commercially fragile, dependent on NBA subsidies, scraping for media deals, fighting for relevance in a sports landscape that wasn't paying attention. Now, for the first time, real corporate money has arrived. Real sponsors with real marketing budgets have shown up. And the reason they showed up is sitting in an NBC studio preparing for a broadcasting debut. If you chase her away or even create enough conflict that her sponsors decide the association is more trouble than it's worth, you don't just lose Caitlin Clark. You lose the commercial moment that was finally going to make this league financially self-sustaining. You lose everything. The conversation about what the league stands to lose brings us to the most uncomfortable truth in this entire situation. The truth that makes the commissioner's warning not just bad strategy, but genuinely delusional strategy. Caitlin Clark does not need the WNBA, not in any meaningful sense, not in any way that changes her financial future, her professional legacy, or her life trajectory. The WNBA needs her with a desperation that borders on existential. And the formal warning issued by the commissioner's office represents a catastrophic failure to understand that fundamental power dynamic. Consider the options available to Caitlin Clark right now at this exact moment, independent of anything the WNBA decides to do. She could join the unrivaled league, the new women's basketball property that's been specifically designed to treat players like the professionals they are, with competitive salaries and modern organizational infrastructure. She could sign with a European club that would pay her what she's actually worth on the open market, without the baggage of institutional resentment and league politics. She could retire from professional basketball entirely and pursue broadcasting full-time, which the NBC deal suggests would be an enormously successful career path that would keep her in the sports conversation indefinitely. She has options, real options, financially viable, professionally fulfilling options that don't require her to accept $76,000 a year, while a league office tells her what she can and cannot do with her time. Now consider what happens to the WNBA if she takes any of those options. The charter flights go away. The ABC primetime slots disappear. The billion-dollar media rights deals that were negotiated in Caitlin Clark's presence get renegotiated in her absence, and the numbers look very different. The merchandise sales collapse. The casual fans who tuned in because of her stop watching. The sponsors who finally arrived because the value proposition was compelling enough stop writing checks. Attendance drops back to what it was before she arrived, which, in many markets, means games that look uncomfortably like what no professional sports league wants its product to look like. Without Caitlin Clark, the WNBA goes back to being what it was before she arrived. A league with passionate fans, talented athletes, and a perpetual struggle to convince mainstream American sports audiences to pay attention. Not a catastrophe, but not the breakthrough moment that finally seemed within reach either. The commissioner's office is holding a warning letter directed at the only person standing between the WNBA and its previous version of itself. And somehow, they think that's a position of institutional strength. It is not. It is the clearest possible demonstration of how badly the current leadership has misread the situation they're in. So where does this go from here? What is the actual endgame when a league that needs its star player more than she needs them decides to go to war with her anyway? The math on this is brutal, and it leads to a conclusion the commissioner's office should have reached before any warning was drafted. The WNBA has two choices available to them now. Neither one is good. The first option, they follow through, they escalate, they attempt to fine Caitlin Clark or impose some form of suspension or formally block her NBC appearances through league enforcement mechanisms. What happens next? The fans revolt. Not the core WNBA fans who've been there through everything. They know better than to direct their anger at the league's own players. The broader audience revolts. The casual fans who arrived because of Caitlin make the simple calculation that the product they're being asked to invest in is not worth their time and money if the organization running it treats its most compelling figure this way. League pass cancellations happen, ticket sales drop, merchandise stops moving. The sponsors who've been watching carefully make their calls, and the WNBA, which has finally experienced what it feels like to have genuine commercial momentum, discovers what it feels like to lose it in real time.
The second option, they back down. They quietly shelve the warning. They issue some vague statement about respecting players' outside business opportunities. They try to minimize the story and move on. What happens next? The veteran players who lobbied for this action feel betrayed.
The commissioner looks weak in front of the locker room she was trying to appease. The institutional authority that the warning was meant to assert evaporates, and every player in the league now understands that the commissioner's office will threaten and then retreat when threatened in return. The formal warning, rather than establishing control, ends up demonstrating the exact opposite, that the league office doesn't have the leverage it thought it had. It's a lose-lose scenario, and it is entirely of their own making. What Caitlin Clark will almost certainly do is exactly what her competitive profile suggests she'll do. She's not going to comply quietly. She's not going to defer to an authority that she has good reason to believe is acting in bad faith. She's going to show up on NBC. She's going to hold that microphone. She's going to sit at the anchor desk and look into the camera and be exactly who she is on one of the largest broadcasting platforms in the country. And she's going to dare the league to do something about it. Not provocatively, not as a stunt, because that's what the contract she signed says she's going to do, and because she knows, and her legal team knows, that the WNBA's warning doesn't have the teeth it's pretending to have. The league's bluff is being called, and everyone watching can see it. Here's where we land after all of it. The formal warning issued to Caitlin Clark by the WNBA Commissioner's Office is the most revealing document in the league's history. Not because of what it says on the surface, not because of the legal language about conflict of interest and broadcasting agreements, but because of what it reveals about the people who wrote it and the institutional culture they represent. It reveals a commissioner who is more interested in managing the emotional comfort of resentful veteran players than in building the business she was hired to run. It reveals a league office that still doesn't fully understand the difference between the period before Caitlin Clark arrived and the period after. Still treats her star power as something that happened to the WNBA rather than something the WNBA is desperately dependent on. It reveals an organization that has been given an extraordinary gift, a once-in-a-generation commercial opportunity, and has responded by trying to control it, constrain it, and remind it of its place. Stephen A. Smith called for the commissioner's resignation. He's right. Not because this is a personnel issue that gets fixed by swapping one executive for another, but because the decision to issue this warning signals a fundamental misalignment between the leader the WNBA has and the leader the WNBA needs. The league needs someone who wakes up every morning thinking about how to protect and amplify and build around the greatest thing that has ever happened to women's professional basketball in this country. Instead, they have someone who sent a warning letter. The gap between those two things is not manageable. It's disqualifying. Caitlin Clark is going to be fine. Her career trajectory, whether it runs through the WNBA, through NBC, through Unrivaled, or through some combination of all three, is going to be defined by her talent and her work ethic and the genuine connection she's built with sports audiences across the country. None of that is going away because a league commissioner is feeling pressure from the locker room. The warning doesn't change what she's worth. It doesn't change what NBC sees in her. It doesn't change what State Farm and Nike and Gatorade are willing to pay for her association with their brands. It changes nothing about her future. It changes everything about the leagues. The WNBA is at an inflection point that organizations rarely get the chance to reach. For the first time in its history, it has the commercial foundation, the media attention, and the public interest to become something genuinely sustainable and significant in American sports. That opportunity exists because of one player, one 22-year-old who showed up and made people care. And instead of building every single decision around protecting and amplifying that opportunity, the commissioner's office issued a warning to the golden goose. The real warning in this story isn't the one the league sent to Caitlin Clark. The real warning is the one the universe is sending to the WNBA. Get out of her way, build around her, protect her, celebrate her, say thank you in public and mean it in private, because this moment, this specific, unrepeatable commercial moment is not guaranteed to last. Stars don't stay forever, opportunities don't wait, and if you spend the greatest era in the history of your league writing legal threats to the person responsible for it, history will remember you as the leadership team that had everything and threw it away. Commissioner Engelbert has a decision to make, and the clock on making it wisely is running out faster than she probably realizes. The warning has been issued. Now we wait to see who was really being warned.